And the Gemara that we learned yesterday was dealing with all these issues of. I mean, we talked about the machlokes of Reb Meir and the Chachamim about if Meiser Sheni is Mammon Gavoya, is it called Hashem's money or is it called my money? And of course, there's a machlokes Rav Asti and Reb Chia Bar Ovin as to the ramifications of that, how far do we take that? In other words, just because Reb Meir holds that Meiser Sheni is Mammon Gavoya, doesn't necessarily mean you can't use Meiser Sheni, you can't use the second tithing items for certain mitzvahs. It's Mammon Gavoya, but it still could be considered yours. So we spoke a lot about that. And we also spoke about the Gzeira Shava, this way of learning the law of matzah, that it has to be yours, from the law of dough, that the dough needs to be yours in order to be chayiv in separating challah. And which brings to mind, they have all these challah bakes where they get a whole group of people and they bake challah and they separate, they do the mitzvah of challah. So what happens? Someone sponsors the dough, the flour, and or someone gives it, and everyone else, a lot of them are free. So people are just coming there, and then they're separating the challah. It really has to be theirs in order to fulfill the mitzvah of separating, in order to be obligated, it's not a bracha levatala, has to be reishis arisa seichem. It's got to be yours. So that's one of the laws where we have this concept of lochem. It has to be yours. Matzah, we see the same thing. Where do we know it from? So the Gemara says it's a Gzeira Shava. You learn it because of the law of challah, just like separating challah. You're only obligated to separate challah if it's a dough that you own, then you're obligated to separate challah from. And if it's we did mention that if it's owned by shutfim, that would also be a obligation. If it's owned by partners, it could also be an obligation, a special way of learning, that it could be you would still be obligated in separating challah. But although that doesn't work by esrog, but esrog has to be yours. But by challah, there is an extra way of learning, an extra word or letter in the Torah that teaches you that even shutfim would be obligated in separating, partners are obligated in separating challah. Anyway, bottom line is the Gemara says that we learn in Gzeira Shava, we learn because it has the same word, we learn matzah also has to be yours. And because of that, if it's Meiser Sheni, if it's made from the second tithing matzah, that would be problematic. Again, people do eat matzah, Meiser Sheni, that's fine. But you want to do the mitzvah with it? Then it has to be considered yours. You can't just be eating something that you're allowed to eat. It's got to be considered yours. And according to Reb Meir, if it's Meiser Sheni, you're not Yotze. According to the rabbis, you are Yotze. You fulfill the mitzvah. Now, what I did want to mention was that, when you learn this Gemara, the Gemara definitely sounds like it gives the implication that, you have the two opinions, Reb Chia Bar Ovin and Rav Asi, and the Gemara makes a big deal out of Rav Asi's opinion. The Gemara says Rav Asi, he says about esrog, he talks about dough, and he talks about matzah, and it gives his view of this argument, Reb Meir and the Chachamim. So, the simple understanding of the Gemara gives you that implication, like that's who the halacha is following. And the thing is that generally when you have an argument, Reb Meir and the Chachamim, so the halacha follows the rabbis. So it would seem like the halacha should be that, what should the halacha be? Is Meiser Sheni Mammon Gavoya? Is Meiser Sheni Hashem's or is it really yours? So it would seem if you just think about the rabbis' names, this is Reb Meir, this is the Chachamim, you would think that the halacha should follow the rabbis, right? And seemingly, Meiser Sheni is ours. It's yours. It's not Hashem's. However, the Rambam, interestingly enough, he paskins Meiser Sheni is Mamoin Gavoya. It's actually Hashem's. Meiser Sheni is really Hashem's, and it's considered you're eating from Hashem's table, so to speak. And the Rambam also says that if you use an esrog of Meiser Sheni, you fulfilled the mitzvah. Now, how does that work? It's Mammon Gavayr. That means the Rambam's paskening like Rameir, the opinion of Rameir. It's Mammon Gavaya. Our Gemara says that according to Rameir, what's the law of an esrog of Meiser Sheni? Ein adam yotze b'yedei chavasi. According to Rameir, you don't fulfill your obligation on Yom Tov. Why not? Because Meiser Sheni is considered Hashem's, right? But what does the Rambam say? Meiser Sheni is Mammon Gavaya, Rameir. But he also says, but you do fulfill the mitzvah. Seems to be doesn't fit with the wording of our Gemara. Our Gemara says Rameir holds ein adam yotze b'yedei chavasi b'yom tov. Esrog of Meiser Sheni. The rabbis hold that yotze, but not Rameir. Rameir holds Meiser Sheni is Mammon Gavaya. The rabbis hold Meiser Sheni is Mammon Hedyot, Mammon Bailim. So the rabbis, I could understand. Rameir, you're paskening like Rameir. You can't go. How do you pasken that your yotze esrog if it's Meiser Sheni esrog? So it comes out, contrary to what you would think, that the Rambam is not paskening like Rav Asi. It comes out the Rambam is following the other view that our Gemara doesn't elaborate as much on, and that is the view of Reb Chia bar Ravin that holds that it comes out that the Rambam is passing like Reb Chia bar Ravin that holds that the issue that we sometimes have with an esrog is only an issue of heter achila. It's only about being able to eat it. It's not about having a din mammon, but not about owning, being considered that it's value, you own a value of it. No, it's the fact that you have the right, you have the ability to eat it. That, according to Reb Chia bar Ravin, is enough to be considered lachem. It's enough to be considered yours. And because of that, even Reb Meir that holds that Meiser Sheni is Hashem's, even according to Reb Meir, Meiser Sheni is really you're eating from Hashem's table. It's not yours. It's really Hashem's. It's still called yours because you could eat it. The fact that you could eat it makes it considered yours. And because of that, even Reb Meir's opinion that says Mammon Gavoya, you'll fulfill the mitzvah with an esrog. An esrog of Meiser Sheni you can fulfill the mitzvah with. Why? Because the fact that you have a heter achila, that you're able to eat it, that's considered yours. That's good enough to be considered yours. And so it comes out that the Rambam is passing the Reb Chia bar Ravin, and he's passing like Reb Meir. And nevertheless, you yotze the mitzvah, even though he's passing like Reb Meir, you yotze the mitzvah because Reb Chia bar Ravin holds that all opinions hold you yotze by the esrog of Arla, an esrog, of Meiser Sheni. You fulfill the mitzvah of esrog because the main thing is a heter achila, not it's not about a din mammon. It's about a heter achila, and you fulfill that, no problem. Once you have the heter achila. So, so first of all, I wanted to emphasize this because yesterday I assumed that the halacha follows the rabbis, and I said I don't think this is the accepted halacha. I think we follow the other view, and we were trying to work on this view. Turns out this is the halacha. So I just wanted to correct that. That's number one. And number two, we struggled a little with it because in what sense do you own something if just because you're able to eat it, does that make you own it? In other words, we make a big deal out of the esrog. Matana al manas lafzer. It's a gift to you. You own it. Now you can fulfill the mitzvah. According to what we're saying, it seems like it's a little. It's not as strict as you would think. You are esrog is meiser sheni. It's Hashem's. You're able to eat it. Oh, that's it. You own it. It's good enough. Like it seems much more lenient. And to me, it seems almost like, how could you call that yours? Just because you can eat it, that's called yours? If the Torah says you need to have this, just because you could eat it, how could that be considered yours? So to me, that was definitely surprising. Again, this is the halacha.
How can you eat stolen food?
How can you eat stolen food?
If it's not yours, then you stole it.
No. It doesn't necessarily mean stolen. I'll give you an example just to understand, in a practical sense. Yesterday, we talked about matzah. When you go to someone's seder and you're going to eat matzah, and you eat from their matzah. So the commentaries say that the owner of the house who owns the matzah should make sure to have in mind that he's giving you the matzah as a gift, that it's yours. In this way, you fulfill the mitzvah. What happens otherwise? Otherwise, the owner of the house is letting you eat matzah. You're not stealing matzah, but it's questionable if it's considered your matzah when you're eating it. In other words, in order to cover yourself, in order to cover the guy who's eating it, that he should fulfill the mitzvah properly, you should have in mind, and he should have in mind, he's fulfilling them, you're both fulfilling them, that you're giving over the ownership to him. It's his, he owns it. Some people actually like to pay something in advance, that the matzah is I own the matzah. And the matzah is mine, I'm fulfilling the mitzvah. So again, we're not dealing with stealing matzah, but the fact is, even if you're just invited by someone's house, the matzah is supposed to be yours. It says lechem, that just like by arisei sechem, it has to be yours. By dough, same thing as matzah is supposed to be yours. Similar to esrog that we say matana al manas lahachzir. So by a matzah we say it's yours. We give you give it to the person. So some commentaries say it's important to emphasize this idea. Others say it's obvious that you're letting him do it in a way that he's going to fulfill the mitzvah, and therefore it's considered his because you obviously want him to fulfill the mitzvah. So we sort of like fit all the blocks in place and make it work that he's going to fulfill the mitzvah. So maybe you don't have to have specific intention, but it's better to have that intention. So getting back to our case, what comes out is that we're talking about an esrog, and the esrog is meiser sheni, and the person who's fulfilling the mitzvah, does he really own it? No. The Rambam says no. It's mammon gavaya, it's Hashem's. But is he allowed to eat it? Yes, you're allowed to eat. You're in Yerushalayim. You're allowed to eat this meiser sheni, this esrog. You're allowed to eat it. You could squeeze it into your tea or whatever. You're allowed to eat it, and therefore you can fulfill the mitzvah. It's considered yours. And I'm trying to figure out, really, this is yours? It's Hashem's. I'm at your table. You didn't have in mind for me to fulfill the mitzvah. You're allowing me to eat it. So how is it mine? Yes, Jeffrey.
So we recite a formula at the beginning of the Seder, called Dichfin Yetze V'Yechul. Maybe that's why we say it. Okay. I never before heard anybody ask this question. But in terms
of our Gemara, Matzah Schem. Our Gemara says this about you need to have matzah. It has to be yours.
No, but Rabbi Papa says Miksiv Matzah Schem.
Right. Where do you get this from? Matzah Schem. The Gemara says because it's Gzera Shava.
But you say Yechul also, don't you? Kol Dichfin?
Yes, but that just invites someone to eat. But again, you didn't say it's yours before you ate it. We're just allowing you to join us.
Nobody ever asked me, if I'm eating at my son's house or my son is eating at my house. But with Ma'aseh Sheni, nobody is quoting the most obvious places. In Devarim, it says that if the place you're supposed to go to, if Yerushalayim is far, that you can switch substitute for that some money, pack it up, and carry it with you to Jerusalem and buy whatever you would like in Jerusalem and eat it. No one is quoting that. It seems to me that's an argument against Rav Meir's opinion, or a substantial explanation to help us to understand that this is something you own.
Right. So you're asking a question on Reb Meir's view. It's interesting. I started mentioning that we wouldn't expect a paskin like Reb Meir, but the Rambam does, and it's based on a Gemara in Kedushin. The Gemara over there does say that we follow Reb Meir in this area because Beis Hillel says like him. So it ends up that we're really asking it like Beis Hillel. Anyway, so the bottom line is that that's the halacha. And you're asking an interesting question. You're saying it doesn't seem like it's Hashem's because you're able to switch it and you're able to do things with it. So why are we calling it Mammon Gavoya?
Maybe, but Gavoya, I mean, it means doesn't mean Kedusha. It means high, like it's another level. But he's not saying, but to say that this belongs to Hashem, I think that's another step.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, Reb Meir says that. He says it's called, I mean, Reb Meir says that this is a problem of according to Rabasi, that there is a problem of not being, you're not really the owner. And of course, Reb Meir, in Rabasi's view, he holds that you need to have a din mammon, so it's more than just being able to eat it. But this is the opinion of Reb Meir, and that it's called mammon gavoya. And about your question, if it's called kadosh, is Meiser Sheni? Does it have? I believe that there is. I mean, we saw it's brought down. I don't know if we did it yesterday, but the Gemara does bring down that. I don't think we got up to it, but it does say Meiser Sheni. You're not supposed to take it in the first place as an esrog. If you did, it's kosher, right? The esrog of Meiser Sheni. Again, Reb Meir might argue with this, but the Mishnah had said Meiser Sheni is you're not supposed to take it, and the Gemara tells us that the reason for that is because you're being machsher it lekabel tuma, and according to the other reason, it's because you're mafsida, you're causing it to get ruined. Right. So there's an element of Meiser Sheni in a certain sense, like kedusha of kadosh, like you don't want to ruin it, potentially. And the pasuk Rashi brings a pasuk kadoshu, so it does seem like it has an element of kedusha to it. Meiser Sheni boy shimar de kodesh ikri. It's called kodesh. So and I don't blame you for not knowing that because it's the next piece of Gemara, but it's so you're asking if it's called kodesh. It does seem like the pasuk says the word kodesh.
Okay, so but we know that the meaning of kodesh in different places means set aside. So this is a very good example that it means set aside. You have a special purpose for it, but you can exchange it, and it certainly is yours.
It certainly is yours. Again, Reb Meir says it's not. You can't necessarily. Certainly, it's yours. There's a lot of things that are kodesh that are not yours. The kodshim in the Beis Hamikdash is definitely shulchan gavoya ka'achil. But it could be maybe there could be an element of yours. And as we're seeing in our Gemara, there are ways of understanding it to be considered yours. That it's either that Mishulchan that even according to Reb Meir that is called shulchan that is called mammon gavoya, it still could be considered yours according to Reb Chia bar Ravin. So there is you could maybe say that it's yours. The question is how. So this is what I was struggling with yesterday. So I did find one thought that might answer this problem, and that is that that what happens if someone steals Meiser Sheni from you? In other words, I'm trying to figure out how can we really call it yours? Yes, you can eat it, and that's important. If you couldn't eat it, then for sure it's not yours. But the fact that you can eat it is necessary according to all opinions. You need to at least be able to eat it. You have to have some type of benefit, be able to benefit. You have to have the general benefits from it. And if you wouldn't be able to eat it, then we would say no, it's not yours. You are able to eat it, but there's more to it than just that. If someone were to steal this second tithing that you're allowed to go to Eretz Yerushalayim and eat it there, and instead someone goes and steals it from you, have they transgressed? It's Hashem's. Rebbeir says it's Hashem's. This is Hashem's food, and he's allowing you to eat it, and someone steals it. Did he do gneva? Did he steal from you, or is it Hashem's? So Hashem lets, is it considered gneva from you? And the answer is yes. It is considered gneva from you, or gzela. It says hagoynev meiser sheni chayev l'shalem. You got to pay it back to the other guy. So he doesn't have to pay double, but he does have to pay the meiser sheni back. And so because of that, because if you took it and you ate it, you're called a gazlan, and you do have to return it if you stole it. So that makes it called yours. That's enough. Again, the other opinion says no. You have to have, it has to be a din mammon. You have to have a certain value. If it's called Hashem's, it doesn't have a din mammon, doesn't have a din, even though someone might steal it from you and consider it a ganav, that's not enough, according to Ravasi. But according to Reb Chia bar Ravin, this point maybe helps us understand that not only are you able to eat it, but it has an element that is called yours. It's not just Hashem's completely. It really has an element that's yours. If someone steals it, they actually have to pay you back. So there is an element of it being yours that you can say this is considered lachem, it's considered yours. So I think that point helps us understand why we will consider it his. And according to the Rambam, the halacha, the final halacha, which is that meiser sheni, someone used an esrog, that's meiser sheni, he does fulfill the mitzvah of lulav and esrog, even according to Reb Meir, the way the Rambam paskins, like Reb Meir, it's mammon gavaya, but it's fulfilled the mitzvah, and I think this adds to the understanding of why it's considered yours. It has to be yours. It is yours. It's Hashem, no, but it's also yours because it's you can eat it, and you also, if someone were to steal it from you, they would be responsible to pay you back. It makes it yours. The other opinion doesn't agree with this. This is Meir, Mammon Gavaya, it's Hashem's, it's not yours at all. You can't fulfill the mitzvah. You did not get the mitzvah. You got to go shake again. Go find another esrog and shake your lulav and esrog again. Because it doesn't have a din mammon, it doesn't have a value that is considered yours. It's meiser sheni, it's Hashem's money. Okay, so that touches on the previous Gemara and also gives us clarity on the halacha that we do follow Reb Meir and Reb Chia bar Avin. And then the Gemara after that, we did have a question. The Gemara had asked, there's a brisa that says Isa shel meiser sheni is exempt from challah, according to Reb Meir. The Gemara brought a brisa. It said that we have a dough of meiser sheni. Dough of meiser sheni. You have to take challah from it. It has a machlokes, Reb Meir and the Chachamim. Sounds very clear, like Rav Asi's view, not like Reb Chia bar Ravin's view. According to Reb Chia bar Ravin, everyone would agree you have to take challah. According to Rav Asi, and we have a brisa that says the same thing like Rav Asi. It says Isa of meiser sheni is according to Reb Meir, you're exempt. According to the rabbis, you're obligated. The same, exactly the same as like esrog. And so the Gemara says, oh, it seems like this might be a proof. The Gemara says, it seems this is a proof. The Gemara says, no, we're not talking about the dough, the law of the dough. We want to compare it to the other cases. It seems like this could be a proof to esrog and to matzah. And on that, the Gemara says, not so fast. Not necessarily is it a proof, because you might think that maybe by dough it says arisosechem twice. That's why it's considered, according to Meir, it's not yours, it has to be extra yours. But the other cases, maybe Meir would agree that it's good enough, that it's considered yours. You're able to eat it, maybe it's considered yours. So a dough would be a different story. So yesterday I mentioned that it seems that there is a big question on the Gemara, because when you have a Gzeira Shava, we normally say Ein Gzeira Shava L'Chatzoin. So if we know the law of matzah from the law of dough, so it would seem that there has to be the same rule. You wouldn't differentiate between one and the other just because it says extra words by one. On the contrary, that would mean that you take those extra words and apply them to the other case, because there's a Gzeira Shava that says you have to compare these two cases. So what is the Gemara having any thoughts that maybe the other case, like matzah, won't have this law? So I said that some commentaries want to say that the Gemara's only thought is really the case of the esrog, not the case of matzah. Matzah is going to be the same law as the dough, because we have a gzeira shava that makes them automatically equal. It's the case of esrog that maybe you might think is different. And on that's why where the Gemara says maybe this could be a proof. It's not 100% proof, because we do have the fact that arisei sechem, it says it twice, so therefore you might say different than esrog. So that was the end of that little piece of Gemara. Then the Gemara talked about Truma Tameya. Truma Tameya is something that the Gemara brought earlier on side A, and it mentioned when you have an esrog that's Truma, you gave it to the Kayin, but it got Tameh, it's impure, and according to Halacha, you're not allowed to eat it. What do you do with it? You got to burn it, for two different reasons we saw. One reason had to do with similar to Kudshim. Another reason was we're afraid you're going to end up eating it. It's truma, it's tummy, it's impure. Somehow something touched it and made it impure. And therefore, the law is it's got to be burned. And the Gemara says that you can't, the Mishnah said it's puzzle, it's invalid to be yoitza the mitzvah before you burn it. You want to use it for yasrug. I need an esrog. Here's my esrog. I'll burn it tomorrow. Today, now I want to use it. No, puzzle, invalid. Why is it invalid? So on this, we mentioned it earlier, it's Einba Heter Achila. You can't eat it. How is it yours? It's Truma, and you're not able to eat it. You're not able to eat it if you don't have the Heter Achila. We can't consider it yours. You don't have the full scope of permit to utilize it for your benefits, and therefore it loses a certain element of being yours, and therefore you don't fulfill the mitzvah with Truma Tameya, with Tameh, because it's Einba Heter Achila. And as we said earlier, everyone agrees that it has to have a Heter Achila. It was a question if it needs to have a din mama and has to have a value to you. But to have Heter Achila, everyone agreed with. Then the Gemara talked about a case of Truma Tahira. What about if you're esrog, and that, of course, that was the Mishnah. The Mishnah says initially you shouldn't take an esrog that's Truma Tahira, that's pure, but it's Truma. And I mentioned that there's an argument between the Rishonim. Is it talking about the Kayin himself? He got it, someone gave it to him, he owns it, but you shouldn't use it for an esrog. You can eat it. It's Truma. He's the Kayin's allowed to eat it. Or there's an argument, maybe it also means an Israelite. But Israelite, somehow he got a hold of Truma, or he didn't give it yet to the Kayin. And the law is that it's better that he shouldn't. It says, Lo Yitol, you should not take it as for the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog. And the Gemara is, of course, asking, so what's the reason? What's the problem? What's the problem with taking it? So the Gemara says,
but he can't eat it.
Truma Tahira. It's tahar. The Kohen can eat it.
So the Kohen can eat it.
Kohen can eat it. So you could give it to a Kohen to eat. You could feed it to a Kohen. You could feed it to your son-in-law who's a Kohen. You know, of course, it's a topic of discussion. It might be talking about the Kohen himself. Maybe the Kohen himself is owning it, according to some opinions. That we're talking about a Kohen here. You know, The Meiri seems to maybe say that it's talking about the kohen himself. Anyway, the bottom line is that it's okay, but better not to do it. But not better. It says you're not supposed to. Lo yitol, don't do it. What's the reason? So he said because number one, because you're machshira, you're causing it to potentially become impure. Because once you put it next to the lulav and esrog, what happens then?
Might get wet.
Might get wet. The lulav is wet. Why is the lulav wet? Because most people keep it in water in order to keep it fresh. So when you touch it to the esrog, it ends up that the esrog, you're going to cause the esrog to get wet. Once something gets wet with water, what happens? Becomes mukhshar l'kabel tumah, becomes susceptible to tumah, to impurity. So we don't want you to make truma susceptible to impurity, and therefore we tell you don't use it in the first place. And the other reason is mivnei shamasida, you're causing it to get ruined if you're using it for an esrog. Why? Because every time you touch the esrog, it gets a little more ruined. And this is truma. This is supposed to be holy, pure. You're not supposed to make it ruin it, desecrate it. So therefore, these are two reasons why you shouldn't use you're not allowed to use an esrog of truma, even though it's tar. If it's tummy, then you can't eat it. That's a much bigger problem. You're not yoitzi, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. If it's truma tahira, seemingly you could fulfill the mitzvah with it. But the problem is that that you're ruining it, or you're causing it to become, either you're ruining it physically or you're ruining it spiritually, basically. These are the two reasons. One is you're machshira l'kabel tumah, you're causing it to possibly become tameh, which basically means you're ruining it spiritually, possibly. And the other is you're ruining it physically, you're causing it, you're mafsida. Yes.
What if you're...
Just 1 second, David. I called on Jeffrey. Did
So
you want to say something?
It's exactly parallel to removing the berries from the hadas. You're not supposed to do it on Yom Tov, but if you did, it's kosher. Because it had to do with achila.
If you remove the berries, we said it's fine. And Miyat on the Mishnah said it's right. If you did remove it, it's kosher. You weren't supposed to do it because of why? You're tikkun kli. You're fixing you're fixing it.
But since it's edible,
if you did it, it was kosher. Yeah, similar, but different reasons. But yeah. Okay, David.
If you're out on the Simon, it starts to rain.
Right.
So the esrog becomes wet. And what?
So if it's truma, if you have an esrog that's truma, that could be problematic. I mean, it really boils down to another issue. There's a big question. I'm surprised the commentaries don't talk about this, but there is a question on our Gemara. What does it mean that you're going to cause it to be susceptible to tumah, to impurity? According to halacha, in order for something to be susceptible to impurity, it needs to be l'ratzoin. It needs to be that you want it to get wet. If you don't want it to get wet, so if you're not happy that it's wet, then it ends up that it's not mukhshar l'kabel tumah. It's not susceptible to impurity. So what does the Gemara mean that, you know why you can't use it? An esrog of truma? Because you're going to be machshir it for tumah because it's going to touch the lulav. What do you mean? You want it to get wet? It's getting wet. It's not you're not benefiting from wet. Wet is maybe going to ruin it. It'll discolor it. So why is that mukhshar l'kabel tumah? You're not, just because it's going to get wet, it's mukhshar l'kabel tumah. This was bothering me yesterday. I couldn't find any of the commentaries talk about it. So the only thing that comes to mind to answer this question is that there could be an element of you want it to stay fresh. You want the esrog to stay fresh. Now, water touches the top of the esrog, which is mainly my question. You don't want that. You don't want that water touching the top of the esrog because that's ruining the color maybe. But water on the bottom of the esrog, that actually helps the esrog stay a little fresh. So in that sense, maybe you are benefiting. You don't have to benefit from the whole water. You're benefiting from part of the wetness. You are benefiting, and maybe you're going to want that. Maybe you'll want that the esrog stays more fresh, that the bottom of the esrog has water. So maybe, again, the Gemara doesn't spell it out, but maybe that's what the meaning is, that it would make sense that a person might want the esrog to stay fresh, that he'll be happy that there's water, at least on the bottom by the stem of his esrog, and therefore it would be considered muksha l'kabel tuma if he's happy about it. And maybe could be something that people would be happy about. And therefore, the Gemara says that you can't use it, you shouldn't use it because of that, because it's going to be muksha l'kabel tuma. Not always, but the Gemara is assuming that there are going to be scenarios where you will want it to be muksha l'kabel tuma, especially when you have the esrogim that have been yellow for a long time. Those esrogim you're getting nervous of. Oy vey. I hope it lasts the whole sukkah. We often have the problem the opposite. It's too green, but you do have the problem the other way. It's I hope it lasts till like you have these flowers and you're hoping they last till Shabbos, till Yom Tov. I hope this fruit will last. This melon will last till Yom Tov. Here you're hoping the esrog will last till the end of Sukkot. So maybe you're gonna enjoy the fact that it's wet and on the bottom, and therefore it will end up being mushal l'kabel tuma. Then you're causing the tuma to the truma, and that would be the meaning. So getting back to your case, David, the fact that it gets wet from the rain, on the one hand, I would say, no big deal, because you don't want it to rain on it. You want the rain, you don't want the esrog. But if the bottom is getting wet of the esrog, then maybe you will want it, and that could be again, you don't want to you want to be machshir l'kabel tuma. So those people that go on mivtzayim on sukkahs, they should make sure to not use a truma esrog. In addition to the reasons of the fact that it's touching the lulav and it could be machshir l'kabel tuma, and because of mafsida, you're causing it to get blemished. You also have the reason that it might rain and it'll be machshir l'kabel tuma. So yes, that would be an additional reason.
We spoke before about the discoloration of the esrog, but there's a mila to a person who's using his esrog, that other people should bench his esrog, and it gets discolored through other people's hands.
Right.
So how does that fit in?
Well, first of all, let's wait till we do about the discolorations and so on, and we'll talk about it there. But yeah, there is a concept that the fact that many people used it for a mitzvah. So even though physically it doesn't look as nice, but spiritually it's a beautiful esrog. It's considered acceptable. But we'll when we get up to the details of the discolorations, we'll talk about it. Okay, so I think that covers the previous Gemara. No, there's one more point. The Gemara says, what's the difference between these two reasons? And the Gemara says, what's the difference between the reason of why shouldn't you use an esrog that's truma tahira, pure truma? Why shouldn't you use it? The Gemara says two reasons. And then the Gemara says, so what's the difference between those two reasons? The two reasons was you're machshir it l'kabel tuma, you're causing it to be susceptible to impurity, and number two, you're causing it to get blemished by touching it so much that it's going to ruin it's desecrating this truma. So because you're touching it, and the more you touch it, the more it's getting blemished. It doesn't look nice for the truma. So the Gemara says, so what's the difference? So Gemara says the difference would be that you called truma not the entirety of it, but only the fruit part of it. The peel part was not considered. You didn't consider that truma. So you sanctified the inside, the fruit part, and by doing that, what happens is the outer shell, by touching it and ruining it, you're not ruining truma. You're not discoloring and making it not nice, the truma. It's just the peel. The peel is not the truma. On the other hand, by water touching it, it is causing that the esrog will become susceptible to tuma, to impurity, even though it's the peel, and the peel is not truma, but it will be machshirit, the kabel tuma, and therefore you will have one problem, you won't have the other problem. So according to the opinion that the problem is machshir l'kabel tuma, that you're causing it to be susceptible to impurity, that would apply even in this case. According to the other opinion that it's all about ruining truma, that's not appropriate, it's disrespectful to the truma. So according to that opinion, you would actually be allowed to use a truma esrog l'chatchila, preferably even in the first place, because am I ruining the esrog by touching it and using it? No, the inside is what's truma. The outer part is not truma, so I could use it. I don't have a problem. The Mishnah says don't do it, because the Mishnah is talking about I sanctified the entirety of the esrog. But if I only sanctified the inner part, the fruit part, then I would be allowed to. The Mishnah is not talking about such a case. So according to that opinion, you would be allowed to. Okay, so that's the difference between these two views. Now, I do see where your question is over here, David. I should really address it, because David is asking. He's really asking a good question. He's asking that the Gemara is considering it, the fact that you're touching it, that it's ruining it. It's desecrated, disrespectful to the truma. On the other hand, in a certain sense, you're doing a mitzvah with it. Doing a mitzvah, you're touching it and doing a mitzvah with it. So, in a certain sense, we should say that's beautiful. Why are we considering it? When it comes to truma, it seems like we consider it more desecration. When it comes to an esrog, if it's just an esrog, it's not truma. We say, oh, it's a beautiful esrog. Yeah, a lot of people benched with it. But when it comes to truma, it seems like we sort of like look at it differently. What do you mean? We should look at it that it's a beautiful truma. Look at that. So many people did a mitzvah with it. It's a beautiful thing. So I guess it's somewhat of seems like a good point, David. Now, so to answer that, I think the answer is that when it comes to the esrog, so we don't have an element of the holiness that truma has, because truma also has an additional element of holiness. So it comes out, yeah, you might be doing an extra mitzvah with it, but at the same time, this is ruining the physical beauty of this holy item, truma. And it's called kodshim in certain places in Torah. It's used, the pasuk does call it kodesh. Truma, we know, is holy, and because of that, it wouldn't necessarily fall in the same category of like an esrog, which is called a tashmish kedusha, which is an item of holiness, an item of mitzvah, tashmish mitzvah. But because it has an element of holiness to it, so we do have to take both into consideration. Yes, it has a mitzvah, but it also has mishmush yadayim. It also has the physical beauty that you're desecrating. That we do take more importance here because it's a tashmish kedusha, not just a tashmish mitzvah, which an esrog is. I would also say one other thing, and that is that when it comes to an esrog, the amount of people that touch it is beautiful, wonderful. It's getting a mitzvah. But when it comes to something that's kedusha, there's also a second point there. Every time you touch it, before you do the mitzvah, not just the shake, you're touching it, you're ruining it. So the mitzvah itself would be fine. If everyone was just doing the mitzvah with it that only moment, maybe then it would be okay even for truma, maybe. But because you also touch it at other times, each time that you're touching it, you're desecrating the truma. When it comes to the esrog, you don't have that problem. All the other times you touch it, okay, I touch it. But the fact is, it's getting dirty, it's getting blemished because of the mitzvah as well. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a lot of the blemish on mitzvah, but all the tiny little blemishes that you don't necessarily always see, but still, every time I'm touching it, I'm causing more blemish. That is a that is an issue with truma, and that you can't get away with. So you're not only touching it during the mitzvah moment, but the second before it, a second after it, picking it up, handing it to the guy. All of that is part of the ruining of the truma that you should not be doing. All of that is all your preparation for the mitzvah. It's not the mitzvah itself. Anyway, so that would be my answer to you. But again, if you want to talk about that concept of the discoloration, and if it's so that really we'll see later. Okay, so now getting back to the new Gemara. So we're up to V'im natal kosher. V'im natal kosher. We're on page 35b, and we must be about 15 lines from the top, maybe 17 lines from the top. V'im natal kosher. If you did take it and use this esrog, that's truma tahira, it is kosher. So again, 35b, about 15 or 17 lines from the top. If you took it, it is kosher. Now, Laman di Omar, the Gemara says, according to the opinion, why is it kosher? Why did you fulfill the mitzvah? So truma you're allowed to eat. So according to the opinion that talked about orla, that it didn't have the heter, the leniency of eating it because orla you're not allowed to eat. So according to that reason, here by truma yesh by heter achila, you do have the ability to eat. Of course, the kohen himself has it, and even an Israelite has the ability to feed it to so on and so on. So according to that way of learning, there is room to say that has a heter achila. He might have a relative that's a kohen, or he could have a relative that's a kohen, or he could give it to someone. Now, Lumanda Amar Levishain Badin Mamain, according to the opinion that it has to have a monetary value, this is truma. Yesh Badin Mamain, it does have a monetary value. Why? Because what happens if you take this delicious esrog, or edible esrog, I should at least say, and you hand it to a woman and say, I want to be Makadesh you, that Hareyat Mekudeshesli, I'm looking to get married. You look like the perfect girl. Hareyat Mekudeshesli, here's the esrog. And if she accepts it, you will be married, at least the first stage of marriage, Kedushin. And so it has a din moment, has a value to you. You are considered an owner of a certain value of this esrog, and therefore, because you could actually be Mekadesh and Isha with it, therefore, so the kohen could marry someone, or an Israelite that somehow got a hold of just truma. He could be Mekadesh and Isha. He could give it to a woman and fulfill the obligation of giving her something that's valuable, at least more than a pruta, more than a tiny coin. And this esrog would have that value, especially in today's day and age when esrogim cost $200. You fulfill you're definitely giving her something of value. So you could be Mekadesh and Isha with a esrog. So therefore, it has a din mummy. Okay, next case. Vishel demai. What about the esrog of demai? That an esrog of demai is considered machloikas beis Shammai beis Hillel if it's your yoitza or you're not yoitza. What is demai? Demai is an esrog that we're not sure if the Am Haaretz, who you bought it from, we don't know if he took the tithings or not. So the Gemara says that if it's such a case, it's called demai. It's an esrog that is unsure. It's a case of a suffix, and we don't have clarity on the rule of the esrog. So the Gemara says, what's the reason of Beis Hillel that you're fulfilled? So it's an argument. Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says you can't be fulfilled the mitzvah with such an esrog. Beis Hillel says, yeah, you fulfilled the mitzvah even though it's a Dubai. We don't know if it was tithe. What's my time to Beis Hillel? What's the reason? Even by mafkalu lenichse b'havioni. The Gemara says, you know why it's considered yours? It's considered yours because you actually could eat it. What do you mean? It's demai. I'm not allowed to eat it. Yeah, but you're rich. But you could actually give your money away, give your money to tzedakah. You could be mafkir, the Gemara's case. You could say, I'm making myself by all my stuff is ownerless. And I'll be poor. And at that moment that I'll be poor, it'll be fit for me. I'll be eligible to eat my demai. What's the reason? Really, demai is only a doubt. Demai is a doubt. We don't know if the guy took Meiser. But according to halacha, the straight letter of the law, before the rabbis came around and made their decree, according to the law, really you should be allowed to eat demai without even doing any tithings. Why? Because the majority of the Amei Haaretz, of the ignoramuses, regular people, the commoners, the majority of them do all the tithings. And you're allowed to rely on Roiv. Hoilchin Basa Roiv. We go after the majority. And because we go after the majority, we assume that they all did the tithings. So because we can assume they all did the tithings, really, I should be allowed to eat it. The rabbis came along and said, no. We got to be extra careful here. Some that don't, we want you to cover yourself. You got to do a whole ceremony, a whole ritual, of reading and saying things, of separations, and some you have to, set aside, and ultimately that extra that's a rabbinic decree. But so what comes out is that the rabbis said their law in the regular case. What about someone who's poor? Someone who's poor, the rabbi said, no, you keep on doing the way you're doing it. You rely on the majority. You don't have to do any extra tithings. You're poor, you're exempt. The same thing applied to Achsanya. The army comes. Are you allowed to give them demai? You're allowed to feed them demai. So a poor person comes to your house, you can feed him demai. Your person himself is poor, he's allowed to eat demai. So the Gemara says, so why is, according to Beis Hillel, why can you use an esrog of demai? He says, you know why? Because you could be poor. You could make yourself poor. And since if you wanted to make ownerless all of your property, it's called hefker, could make it hefker, make it ownerless, and you would be considered poor and it would be fit for you. So hashtanami lachem karina bay. So we can consider the fruits yours because you have the ability to eat it. By doing, all you got to do is say I'm mafker because we learned in a Mishnah. You're allowed to give poor people demai. You can even give the army. The army comes and they're relying on the community for food. And the law is you're allowed to rely on the law, the biblical law. There's no rabbinic law about demai in such a case. According to Beis Hillel, that we allow aniyim and achsanya to have demai. And the rabbi's decree doesn't apply in these type of cases. They didn't make their decree. So according to Beis Hillel, would you be allowed to use an esrog of demai? Beis Hillel says it's kosher. Why? Because theoretically, you have a potential being eligible for it to eat. So could you eat it? Yeah. Not right this second, and in 2 seconds I could eat it. If I just said, if someone were to say all of my property is hefker, then they could eat it. So they're able to make themselves eligible to eat demai, and therefore it's considered theirs. Beis Shammai, what do they hold? Ani lo yachol demai. They hold that a poor person can't eat demai. Nan, because we learned in a Mishnah that the Mishnah says machlenas anim demai v'sachsanyim sanoyim. You could feed the poor people demai, you could feed the army demai. But Rav Huna says, it was taught in a brisa, that Beis Shammai holds that the rabbis weren't lenient with the poor people and with the army, and they also are not allowed to eat demai. Beis Hillel says, Beis Hillel says you are able to, as the Mishnah says, the brisa also brings the Beis Hillel's view that you are allowed to feed them demai. So according to Beis Hillel, you're allowed to have an esrog of demai and fulfill the mitzvahs. You're called lachem, it's called yours. Okay, now comes the next case. Next case is Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim. Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim, it says l'chatchila lo yitol. The Mishnah said that Meiser Sheni. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim lo yitol. You're not all kosher. You're not allowed to use an esrog of Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim. But if you did, you fulfilled the mitzvah. Of course, we've been talking about this a lot. Meiser Sheni, esrog of Meiser Sheni, is it considered yours or is it considered Mammon Gavaya? And so now we summarize everything that we learned until now. And this is Gemara. It now summarizes what we've been talking about for 2 days. Laman di Yamar Nefnei Shemachshira. according to the opinion that you have, no, I'm sorry. The next little piece summarizes it. This piece just says, what's the reason why you're not allowed to take it in the first place? This Gemara says that the reason why you can't take it in the first place is similar to Truma. Truma Tahira, we said, you know what? You're not supposed to use Truma Tahira in the first place. What was the reason? Either Memnei Shemachshira or Memnei Shemafsida. Guess what? The same thing as Meiser Sheni. The same thing that we said about Truma. It says, according to the opinion that says you're not supposed to do Truma is because of Machshira, because you're preparing it to become susceptible to Tuma, to impurity. So Machshira, you're doing the same thing with Meiser Sheni. You're causing it to become susceptible to impurity. According to the opinion that you're ruining it because you're touching it. No, the same thing as Mafsida, you're ruining the Meiser Sheni. And Meiser Sheni, as I mentioned earlier to Jeffrey, that the Meiser Sheni also has a similar law, similar wording to like Truma Tahira, that you have to, it's considered Kodesh, because it has an element of holiness. Then comes the next Gemara. If you did do it, it's kosher. And here you have a great summary. According to the opinion that it's all about, in order to be yours, you need to for sure have a heter achila. And that's the most important thing. You're able to eat it. Arla was not that way. Arla, we said, was a esrog that's from the first 3 years of growth of the tree. You can't use it. Why? You can't eat it. So you can't eat it. We can't consider it yours. It's also bahana. It's also bachila. It's prohibited to benefit from, prohibited to eat. You can't really be considered an owner of something if you don't have the ability to use it. So so if you don't have a heter achila, that's a problem. But here it's an esrog of meiser sheni. Are you allowed to eat it? Of course you're allowed to eat it. You're supposed to eat meiser sheni. So according to the opinion that says that the main thing is that you have to be able to eat it. Everyone agrees. Even Reb Meir agrees that even though it's Hashem's meiser sheni, nevertheless you are considered the owner because you do have the heter achila. You don't have a value in it because it's Hashem's. According to the opinion that says that you need to have in an esrog, it needs to have a din mammon. You have to have a certain value that you own. And according to the case of Arla, you didn't have a value. You don't have an ownership of the Arla because it's prohibited to benefit from. You can't do anything with it. You can't even sell it. You can't do anything with it. So it needs to have a din mammon. So Arla was not good. But what would they say about esrog of meiser sheni? Esrog of meiser sheni, so it really depends. According to the rabbis, it's called your money, your meiser. Your meiser sheni, you're allowed to eat it. You can do whatever. It's yours. It's considered yours. According to Reb Meir, it's considered mammon gavoya. So you need to have an ownership. And if it's called Hashem's, you can eat it, but do you really have an ownership of it? It's really Hashem's. So according to the opinion that you need to have an ownership of it, Hamani Rabbanan, this will only fit like the rabbis. It won't fit like Reb Meir. So this Alman Amar, the second Alman Amar is Reb Chia bar Rav, and the first Alman Amar was Reb Asi. So this summarizes the previous Gemara, how they learned the Mishnah. That the Mishnah says if you use an esrog of meiser sheni, it's kosher. Who is that following? Which view? Is that Reb Meir or is that the Chachamim? Or is it both? So according to Reb Chia bar Ravin, it's both. Everyone agrees that an esrog of meiser sheni you can use it's kosher. According to Reb Asi, the Mishnah only fits with the rabbis, not with Reb Meir. Because according to Reb Asi, you need to be able to say, I own this esrog in a substantial way. And if it's meiser sheni, you're allowed to eat it, but it's really Hashem. It's not really yours. It's hard to be convincing that it's yours. So can you yoitze your mitzvah? Reb Meir, no. According to Reb Meir, you're not yoitze. According to the rabbis, you yoitze. So it's Rabbanan. He goes according to the rabbis. Okay, so we are going to stop here. We're up to also chazozis about the esrog growing blisters, having blisters on it. Okay, we're going to stop there. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank
you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Good Shabbos.